When the abstract for this presentation had been submitted to the ECLAS Conference team in Uppsala, the Moria camp on Lesbos Island housed more than 20,000 people. Back then, it constituted Europe's largest and most media-exposed refugee camp. Initially, it had been a local reception and identification center for refugees. From 2015 onwards, it became one of the so-called hotspots, an EU-run reception center to identify and fingerprint migrants and refugees. The original camp facilities, however, had been laid out for about 3,000 people only. Moria was epitomizing a much larger geographical, political, and economical phenomenon, the so-called European refugee crisis. While the willfully inadequate formal camp planning and management efforts led to a hopeless dead end, the multinational, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious forced collective of dwellers took the further spatial and functional development into their own hands and began to transform the deficient camp structure into a rudimentary city. Finally, Moria camp became a city of more than 20,000 desperate souls, constituting the second biggest city on Lesbos Island. Only Mytilene, the island capital, had more population. For those who had seen the shameful and unsafe conditions in the overcrowded camp, like we and our students from the Landscape Architecture for Global Sustainability program at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences did, it happened the way it had to. The Moria camp finally burned down due to malicious arson at the beginning of September 2020. In January 2020, long before the fire, we conducted fieldwork in and around the Moria camp because processing centers for refugees present a range of challenging outdoor design problems. The camps are regarded as temporary and disposable. They occupy otherwise undesirable locations in the landscape. Occupants are socially separated from their host, and they embody unpleasant political messaging. Thoughtful spatial design is rarely employed, but could be. Design work based on such settings presents a chance for students to face and address some challenging social and environmental issues of the global future. The resulting work of the students was impressive, at least for us, the tutors, as well as for reviewers and guests. The fieldwork was challenging, but the students came to terms with it. They had to design for 30,000 refugees and migrants, 10,000 more than at the time of the investigation. The students did not only consider shelter and infrastructure, they also understood identity building as a topic. The young academics saw things that they did not expect in the European context. They got the deepest possible insight into the reality of the camp. And they began to understand what it means to design one place for 20,000 to 30,000 people. Outdoor plays a key role in a camp. Landscape architects are in demand. The students appreciated that. Before the camp sprawled, age-old olive groves were the main land use. Field photography by students at its best. Refugee camps can be found everywhere in the world. Their characteristics feature great variety. The students did their homework. And camps become cities, no matter where they are located. Housing beyond camping is, of course, a core issue. These were just a few glimpses into the demanding studio work. It was evident that only a fractional amount of the camp population could be housed inside the formal part of the camp. A fence with barbed wire, though perforated, was a remnant of the bygone military use. The rest, more than 15,000 people in 2020, dwelled in the informal sprawl of the camp, an olive grove dubbed the jungle beyond the official camp area. Those who arrived without entitlement to be housed in the formal part of the camp had been offered a tent, if in stock, and been asked to choose between the only two options in the jungle, the Arab-speaking realm and the non-Arab-speaking realm. This simplistic categorization may sound surreal and cynical, but this is exactly how things were handled in Moria. In the informal camp, the main resource for heating and cooking had been collected or cut down firewood. It were particularly the sounds of this desperate place that let us comprehend how miserable it was. Hearing the down chopping of the age-old olive trees reminded us, without any joking or wisecrack, of another Moria. It is the city of the dwarfs named Moria, not far from Isengard, the fortress of Saruman the wizard in Tolkien's fictional Middle-earth in Lord of the Rings. We use such weird analogy because the shameful Moria camp was a real place on territory of the European Union. The living conditions in the camp were beyond words. At the same time, the place featured an incredible creative power. Fueled by bare desperation, grimly will to survive, and human resilience, this energy was directed into a clear direction, turning an inoperative provided camp for refugees into a rudimentary, self-built, informal city for migrants. Those who had to survive in Moria's makeshift environment impressively demonstrated how to create something with almost nothing. Such pathetic starter conditions spurred a flourishing informal house-building market. Those who came with disposable asset were able to purchase a kind of turnkey solution, a flimsy, non-isolated tiny house hammered together and sold by business-minded camp dwellers. The standard price for such artifacts was, in January 2020, €400. The workmanship of these expensive abodes was not great, but they featured an essential distinction to a camp tent. They were no tent, at least. The core questions of our ECLAS presentation are related to this critical difference between a structure and a tent. Why is the European Union offering them tents instead of sturdy structures? Most of these migrants never lived in a tent before. Most of them came from large and impressive cities. We are convinced that this constituted an important reason that so many new dwellers in the Moria camp were willing to pay barefaced prices for something that was at least not considered a typical tent. Euro was the currency, whereas the least dignity was the equivalent value. While the official providers of the Moria camp failed in almost every respect, their desperate words successfully began to transform, piece by piece, a deficient camp into an inchoate, urbanizing settlement. Initially prohibited, all sorts of small shops began to be established. Private cars were purchased and used for all sorts of delivery and transportation services. Such dynamics of informality can, of course, be found everywhere in the world, but please, let's not forget that the Moria camp was located on EU territory. Providing and consuming self-cooked fresh food, in contrast to queuing for donated food rations packed in aluminium and plastic, became important drivers for a flowering food stall and restaurant business activity in the Moria camp. One of the largest and best-known informal structures located in the Arab-speaking realm was a Middle Eastern restaurant. It was just a large tent, but the customers, inclusive our students, did not consider visiting and stay in a tent. They dined in the best restaurant of the Moria camp and were provided a temporary feeling of a bit of urbanity. Not far from the restaurant was the best hairdresser's shop of Moria, the Tehran barber and hairdresser. A master of his trade provided professional hair care, high fashion, constituting much more than just haircut and shave, by offering a moment of urban lifestyle and dignity. The national and ethnic hyperdiversity and hyperactivity reminded us, in a peculiar way though, on the Old Testament Tower of Babel. A forced collective, though diverse as it could be, desperately tried to build a kind of tower, an informal city, not glitzy, prosperous or smart, whereas everyone could somehow sense that this place didn't have a future and that no one would become a citizen of it. From the outset, it was doomed to fail, unwanted by the local population, unwanted by the European politicians, even unwanted by those who actively built the place. But every day, many thousands of camp dwellers continued to build and develop this luckless city. In hindsight, it could be interpreted as an analogy for the human reflex-like desire to transform camps, connoted with their military provenance and temporariness, to cities, connoted with their character of civilized and cultured places and their permanence. After the Moria camp vanished in flames, the desperate dwellers were provided the next camp, with tents at a former shooting range. This new camp, dubbed Moria 2.0, is, according to the judgment of aid organizations, even worse than the former Moria camp. A German doctor who works in the new camp reported that if it rained, a mud desert with rivers and lakes would develop. The reporting doctor wanted to remain anonymous because a new law by the Greek government prohibits helpers in refugee camps from talking to the media about grievances. In the absence of washing facilities, scabies and lice are omnipresent, open wounds, diarrhea, and respiratory diseases are often treated. The living conditions here make you sick, says the doctor. The people in the new camp, with its strict structure, will not be offered an opportunity to tackle the development of an informal city again. What did not change for them, though, is their state of deep despair, as well as their desire for the least urbanity and dignity. Thank you very much.